Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to welcome you here today on behalf of our co-hosts, Dr. Oris Sanhur, Deputy Director of the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, and the Minister of Tourism of Panama, Ivan Esquilson Alfaro. My name is April Gao of Broach Associates and Senior Policy Advisor to Beautiful Destinations, and I am your Master of Ceremonies this morning. Our program today is a roundtable discussion on the connection between sustainability, tourism, biocultural heritage, science, and community economic development. The scientists and conservationists who we have invited here today know and love Panama. And now I would like to introduce our panel. Dr. Tamsin Woolley Barker is the Dean of the Geoversity School of Biocultural Leadership in Panama. She is the author of Teaming: How Superorganisms Work to Build Infinite Wealth in a Finite World, which is an Amazon bestseller in organizational learning and environmental economics. Maxi Miliano Bayo is Global Ocean Policy Advisor at Mission Blue, founded by the world-renowned Dr. Sylvia Earle. Max has worked in the environmental arena for over 2 decades to advance marine conservation priorities. He has worked for non-governmental organizations in Chile and the US, including the Pew Foundation, Oceana, and World Wildlife Fund. Vern Harnish is a world-leading expert, speaker, and author and entrepreneur in the field of business growth. He is the owner and CEO of Scaling Up and has spent more than 30 years educating entrepreneurial teams. Bruce Poon Tip is a Canadian entrepreneur and philanthropist and founder of G Adventures, an award-winning global adventure travel company that caters to small groups of discerning travelers, and he is a pioneer of community-based tourism. He is also the founder of Planetera, an NGO that helps local people develop their communities, conserve their environment, and provide social solutions to local business challenges. Michael Schmidt holds a PhD in molecular science and biochemistry and a second PhD in neuroscience. Dr. Schmidt is the founder and CEO and Chief Scientific Officer of Savaris Aerospace, a company focused on assessment and solutions applied to humans in space and extreme environments on Earth. To set the context for our discussion today, it is fair to say that the country of Panama is an undiscovered treasure when it comes to tourism. Although this may seem strange, as Panama has been an international crossroads since the 16th century, when the Spanish and other Europeans discovered that it was the quickest route between the Atlantic and Pacific. Because of its unique location, Panama has always been an exceptional place for commerce and business. Indeed, when North Americans hear of Panama, we think of the Panama Canal, one of the most important transit points on the planet. The fact is, most of us don't know that Panama is a paradise when it comes to natural beauty. And there are more species of birds and plants in the rich tropical rainforests in a country the size of South Carolina than there are in all of Canada and the United States combined. And that the Pacific shores of Panama, known as the Eastern Tropical Pacific, is one of the 4 most important seamounts on the planet and home to an extraordinary array of coral reefs, sea mammals, sharks, fish, turtles, and other sea life. But the people who do know about the rich biodiversity of this beautiful undiscovered treasure of a country are scientists and conservationists. The tradition of scientific research in Panama began in 1910 as a result of the construction of the Panama Canal between 1903 and 1914, when Smithsonian scientists and naturalists from across the United States convinced President Theodore Roosevelt to support a biological expedition to take an inventory of the flora and fauna before the canal would forever alter the landscape. Today, the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute is used by some 30 resident scientists and annually for some 1,400 visiting scientists from academic and research institutes around the world. Another footnote on this history, and to set the context, I would like to highlight that 22 years ago, in 1999, Panama successfully launched in Washington, D.C., at the Smithsonian Institution, the government's first Tourism Conservation Research Alliance, the brainchild of Dr. Hannah Ayala, with the support of the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. The event was led by then President of Panama, Ernesto Perez Valladares, and was an unprecedented milestone for the Panamanian tourism industry. It was a world-class strategic alliance between the scientific, conservation, and tourism sectors, and received widespread acceptance. However, the initiative was discontinued the following year. But here we are, 22 years later. Panama returns to Washington, D.C. after the president of Panama, Laurentino Cortizo Cohen, relaunched the Tourism Conservation Research Alliance last year through Executive Decree 598. In a few short months, so much has already been achieved, which you will hear about shortly. Panama has become a leader in sustainable tourism, and the TCR model is now an open template for other countries to draw on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an exciting story. It's an idea whose time has finally come because Panama needs it, and the world definitely needs Panama and all she has to offer. I would like to now hand over to our moderator, Dr. Ori Sanhur. Dr. Sanhur.
Thank you, April. Good morning, everyone. It is a really true pleasure for us to welcome you all, to welcome Mr. Ivan Skilton, Minister of Tourism of Panama, our distinguished panelists, and every one of you who are here with us, and those of you who are actually joining us virtually. Welcome to the Smithsonian. It's a pleasure to have you all. And today we're here to talk about a roundtable on the connection between sustainability, tourism, biocultural heritage, science, and community economy development. But before we go into that, I would like to take a moment to share with you something about the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. So let's actually go through a short presentation so we tell you a bit more about STRI in Panama. And I want to take this opportunity to welcome Minister Skilton and the government of Panama for hosting us in our country. It's thanks to the collaboration between Panama and the Smithsonian that we're able to have more than 100 years of successful science in the tropics. So a little bit about our mission. What do we do? Our mission is to increase and diffuse knowledge of the past, present, and future of tropical biodiversity and its relevance for human welfare. And I want to highlight two words in our mission. Increase, which refers to actually doing research. It's actually our core, what we do. And the second word is diffusion. It's ability that we have to be able to share that knowledge with the world. And that is one of the things that we're doing today. The increase of the knowledge is done in many ways by our projects that is done by scientists in different areas. We'll share in a bit. But the diffusion is also done by actually through scientific papers that are published in high-end journals, as well as through our public programs and our reach programs. And we hope to be sharing more of that in the coming years with the audience here in Washington, D.C. as well. Next. So now we have our short video of what we do.
What is the effect of global warming on tropical trees?
How did the pre-Columbian inhabitants of Panama impact the natural environment?
Are fungi the reason there are so many rare tree species in tropical forests?
How do ants live in the canopies of tropical forests?
How do bats perceive the world?
Everyone has a question. What's yours?
And that's true. Everyone has questions, and that's what we do. We answer questions because science is based on curiosity. And I also want to say that we all are born being scientists because we are all born being curious, right? So that's what we do. We answer questions to try to learn more about the world, especially in a moment in time where the tropics are important, to actually try to provide some of the key answers to many of the challenges that we face as a species. So why Panama? What is so special about Panama? Well, in addition to being one of the host spots of biodiversity, Panama has an amazing geological story and a history as well. The rise of the Isthmus of Panama provided an amazing opportunity for an actually wonderful experiment. On the one hand, it actually closed the gap between the Pacific and the Atlantic, and that actually allowed for species to speciate. But on the other hand, it created a bridge between the north and the south that allowed then species from the north and the south to exchange. That is what is called the Great Inter-American Exchange. And that has been actually well studied because the rise of the Isthmus of Panama changed the climate of the world. That changed the currents, changed the way that the oceans behave, and that actually had an impact on how we actually see climate today. So Panama, on itself, by being this amazing piece of land, provides also wonderful opportunities. And we also probably heard that Panama is a hub, a commercial hub, a logistic hub, but Panama is also a hub of biodiversity. And as April mentioned, we host more species of birds and plants than actually countries in the temperate zone. Next, please. A little bit of our history. Actually, let me take you back 100 years since we began. So back in 1910, before the closure of the Gatun Lake, prior to the construction, during the construction of the Panama Canal, there were scientists from the Smithsonian that came to Panama to do a survey of the flora and the fauna. And actually, that represents the first baseline information of biodiversity in Panama. Thanks to the vision of the president of Panama at the moment, Pablo Rosemena, he actually sent a letter to the Secretary of the Smithsonian to expand that research across the country. And that represents the first exchange of diplomacy between Panama and the Smithsonian with regards to get an understanding about our biodiversity. So if we fast forward, in 1923, we opened the Barra Colorado Island Laboratory. I just want to make a note, in 1923, it will be 100 years in 2023, so we're very pleased to be actually celebrating the 100 years of the opening of Barra Colorado Island, the BCI for short. If we fast forward, then up until that moment, since 1923 to early 1940s, the Barra Colorado Island was under the management of a group of scientists, and in the 1940, the U.S. Congress took actually official management of it, and in 1946, it gave it as a concession to the Smithsonian. So that represents the beginning of the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. We had acquired the name officially in 1966. And as you know, with the treaties in 1977, the Torrijos-Cartes Treaty allowed for an opportunity to strengthen that relationship. And in that treaty, there is actually a clause that allowed the Smithsonian to keep the custodianship of the Barra Colorado Island, and we actually have that to this date. We are in Panama, thanks to the University of Panamanian government. Thank you, Minister Skilson. And we have an agreement with Panama to continue doing what we do best, which is do research. Next. So what are the scientific areas? What do we do? We have a variety of different areas that we currently do research on. Abnormal behavior, archaeology, botany, canopy biology, geology, molecular biology, soil biology, microbiology. There is actually the interactions of different areas in the base of what we do is getting a better understanding of the tropics and the biodiversity that it hosts. Next. So a bit of our research platform, very quickly. As I mentioned, more than 100 years doing actually pioneering science in the tropics. We have around 425 staff, including about 30 staff scientists. We have around 13 facilities across the country. I'll show it in a minute. More than 1,200 scientific visitors. And then some ideas, 172 buildings distributed across the country, plus around 478,000 square feet of area, of construction areas. And we host actually one of the most successful libraries in the tropics as well. Next. Our facilities, I like to say that Panama is our laboratory. From the border with Costa Rica to the border of Colombia and the north and the south, Pacific and Atlantic, pretty much all of it, we do research in Panama. But in red, the dots in red shows some of the 13 facilities that we currently actually have in Panama. Next. So with that, this is Rose the sloth. If you ever go to Punta Culebra, which is one of our outreach centers and public program centers, you will be greeted by Rose, which is a sloth, one of our sloths in the site. So with that, I just want to thank you all for your attention. And it is my pleasure now to introduce Minister Ivan Skilson, Minister of Tourism of Panama, who's going to actually be giving some words, welcoming words. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjur. I'd like to welcome you all, our guests that are here assembled in person, both in person and virtually, since we also have a virtual audience. For us, this is an honor to share with you this roundtable. Truly historical moment since, as our MC gracefully mentioned, we are here assembled 22 years later than the first launch of the first international launch of the Tourism, Conservation, and Research strategy, back then by President Ernesto Pérez Valladares. So again, 22 years later, we're here assembled with this great panel in this roundtable, trying to reimagine tourism based on the challenges we are facing today and based on the modern trends of travel today. So, considering this post-pandemic world, what we have seen is a huge paradigm shift where the modern traveler and in general, consumer demand is undergoing great change. Millennials have now become the largest adult population in the world, especially here in the US, but it is a worldwide shift. And this great consumer base is not only now the largest population, but it's also influencing the rest of the generations with their savvy use of social media. So with this use of social media, what is happening is that their expectation for tourism and in general the world to impact positively communities as well as to protect nature is now becoming the trend, and that's part of what we will be speaking today. So taking this consideration and also climate change, which we all know that is also influencing the world deeply, where we now all need to adapt to climate change and also mitigate the effects of climate change. What we have done in the Authority of Tourism is to create a new model where we want to take this shift in demand and address and make the best use of our resources in Panama so we can attract this demand. So I have requested Senior Advisor Darío Yanguimal to conceptualize this new model that we're sharing today and with this panel, with the help of ATP team, Dewey Valiente and Nicole Marciac and other members of the team. And that's what we are here today, inspired by the original TCR, Tourism Conservation Research Strategy, as well as the work of our partners, Geoversity, which will also inspire this model. So this is what we'll be sharing today, a new tourism model for Panama. So we will be speaking about transformative tourism. Today's travelers are certainly increasingly drawn to travel as a form of fulfillment and also seeking personal transformation and growth. So on one hand, we have transformational travel, and the other hand, we also have regenerative tourism, where travelers are getting involved in improving the lives of local people and communities, where the environment and culture, by their visit and while visiting, they're expecting this impact. And this phrase is actually by one of our panelists, Bruce Puntep, who will be also sharing his participation later. So with these two themes, we are addressing through our Sustainable Tourism Master Plan that for the first time in the country's history was approved by the President Cortizo and the cabinet, giving this endorsement of this national strategy. And we're talking to address to the discerning traveler who is interested now in the issues of social and economic inclusion, as well as environmental and cultural protection. They indeed seek for authentic and transformative experiences in contact with nature and the cultures of local communities, while pursuing the meaning in life and yearning for a spiritual connection. So whatever the reasons, this is a huge shift in what is going on in demand, and then we think we are prepared in Panama to attract this demand. We're speaking about a market that is over 500 million travelers today. So we're not talking about a small market, a small niche market. We're talking about a very large market that is growing very fast. So as I said, we are inspired in the original Tourism Conservation Research Strategy, which proposes tourism as a catalyst that can contribute to conservation through scientific research. So the spending dollars of tourism can be this great catalyst and create the synergies with science and research, with science and conservation. With the original model, there were heritage routes developed where we can showcase the natural and cultural heritage of Panama, while also attracting these financial resources through quality investments, we would say today sustainable investments, who in turn invest in adopting conservation projects. The difference back then was that through experiential tourism, the paradigm then was, there was a distance between the observer and the observed. So there was a limited exchange between the visitor and hosted communities, which is part of the change we are addressing now. So for tourism to be an issue or to have a positive impact on conservation and the sustainable development goals, we are taking on the one hand what we are taking as the biosphere and biodiversity, if we consider biosphere as a sum of all ecosystems on Earth, and biodiversity as the variety of living species on Earth. But what we're seeing is that because of human action and human behavior, we are now creating this danger for much of the world's biodiversity that's now in danger of extinction. So that on one hand, but on the other hand, we also have what we call the ethnosphere and the ethnodiversity, where we're also having an erosion on culture and from communities having to migrate to cities because of economical opportunities. So what is happening is what Dr. Wade Davis defines as the sum of all thoughts and intuitions, myths and beliefs, ideals and inspirations of humanity, so the sum of all the ways of thinking, the ethnosphere. We consider it important to preserve also this ethnodiversity, which is a variety of ethnic groups that live together in a common territory. And the reason of this importance is that with this phrase, every 2 weeks, the last person who speaks an ancient language dies. When a language is lost, the traditions, beliefs, and intellectual wealth of a culture are lost with it. So with that idea from that movie, you might remember The Last of the Mohicans, when the last members of a culture die, maybe something that's more important, their ancestral wisdom also dies with it, and especially considering indigenous groups. There is one of the elements we are considering in the tourism model we are sharing today. So with the research, for example, of Rotterdam, there's a very important element that is highlighted, that throughout the years with these conservation efforts, nature has been separated from human culture, and trying to address conservation from that with that focus separating these two elements has become a serious problem in the conservation of both nature and culture and cultural heritage, which is why we are bringing to the table the concept of biocultural heritage, which bridges these two elements of nature and human culture. So with biocultural heritage, we're referring not only to the knowledge and practices of indigenous peoples and other communities, but also the way they relate to their environment, so what their beliefs are, and how they can relate to their environment. And the importance of this is highlighted by this phrase from National Geographic, where they say that comprising less than 5% of the world's population, indigenous people protect 80% of global biodiversity. So there's a key here. So maybe to protect nature, we need to protect better indigenous communities throughout the world, considering that such a small percentage has been so successful preserving biodiversity. And through tourism is where we believe that we can actually emphasize the importance of preserving this heritage. Also, we are highlighting the importance of endogenous development, which means creating socioeconomic environment that enables communities to be self-sufficient, also promoting national products, generating local employment, respecting the environment, with the idea of eventually reaching the end game of the positive impact we expect to better adapt and to help mitigate climate change. So today there is a robust consensus from the scientific community that anthropogenic global climate change is occurring. So there seems to be no doubt that we are having this negative impact. The alarms are off, and now we need to change the way we do things. So a call to action has been issued to protect the last wild places on the planet and the indigenous people who protect them. And through this model, we are bringing forward the idea that the ethnosphere protects the biosphere, and that ancient wisdom is important for life on Earth. And it so happens to be that Panama is a great place, sort of an ideal place to lead these efforts. And this is where we bring this new tourism model for Panama, where transformative and regenerative tourism has the potential to strengthen, preserve, adapt, and restore the ethnodiversity and biodiversity of our planet. Why, with this new economic model, allowing tourists and their spending to improve the quality of life of communities, and at the same time promoting personal and spiritual growth, training leaders and creating the importance of biocultural heritage and maintaining the balance required to adapt and mitigate climate change. So with this model, again, inspired by the original TCI strategy from 1999, we highlight Panama's natural and cultural heritage, encouraging its conservation through scientific research, but now responding to the demands of the modern discerning traveler we've been speaking about. So empowering communities by promoting endogenous development, highlighting the importance of protecting our biocultural legacy, and contributing to the regeneration of the ethnodiversity and biodiversity. Also promoting cultural exchanges and reinforcing local identity, as well as helping mitigate climate change with non-carbon related benefits that create economic and local and social sustainability in vulnerable communities. So this concept is considered in the Paris Agreement, even though most efforts are considered directly on the sequestration of carbon. It is now an important way to work, and Panama is one of the first countries to work on these non-carbon related benefits, where tourism can help communities manage their natural resources, their forests, and their marine equivalent. So tourism can create the economical sustainability for these communities to be able to preserve their forests, and that's also one of the initiatives that we are working with University together. So with this, we align the efforts to achieve or to help achieve sustainable development goals. And why is Panama an ideal country to lead this effort? Is because we have this extraordinarily and easily accessed biodiversity and ethnodiversity. A very small country where it happens to have this pristine nature, possibly one of the only countries in the world where we have both 30% of terrestrial and marine protected areas, but also very diverse communities with 7 indigenous peoples, and the Afro diaspora, as well as autochthonous communities. So to finalize, Panama has an enormous potential to develop an innovative tourism model that meets the needs and aspirations of a growing market of discerning travelers, where through this TCI alliance, Panama is working with the public and private sectors, NGOs, and scientific community to implement this model, contributing to the conservation of our ethnodiversity and biodiversity, as well as the country's biocultural legacy. This indeed is a paradigm shift for a broader and more inclusive model that will be shared as an open source template, which can be implemented by other countries committed to a more sustainable future. So the planet's alarms are on, demanding new ways of doing things. The market is also demanding new ways to be done more efficiently as far as this global problem we have. So with the contribution of this great panel that we have today of scientists, conservationists, and experts, let's reimagine tourism together, and we hope you can all enjoy the rest of the roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Yvonne, for that inspiring presentation. It sets us off on such a great note. I'd now like to call on Dr. Michael Schmidt for his presentation.
Greetings, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for all your time and for all of you who've spoken so far. I think it's been an extraordinary setting of the context for this. And one of the things I'd like to just briefly explore is, in our work, we're often looking at space flight, and we work in extreme environments. And I'd like to get some perspective here. So imagine if you're a space traveler, and we're used to looking at planets like Mars and barren structures in space. But if you take a brief look at Earth, if we were traveling through space and we saw this in comparison to something like Mars, we would look at this planet as something so unique, so extraordinary, and so deserving of protection. And one of the things that would stand out, if you were to look back through the millennia and say, what would be one of the most interesting places on Earth to explore if we were coming in from outer space, we would end up here. And Dr. Sanhur talked about briefly this unique formation. I'd like to add just one additional comment to that, because this was a confluence of the warm waters of these oceans at one time, and over time when the bridge formed, it actually formed what's called the Gulf Stream. And so we all know the Gulf Stream as this extraordinary confluence of warm water currents that actually changed the climate of Greenland and Iceland and Northern Europe. So in one sense, you could think of Panama and the Isthmus of Panama as being that structure that actually changed the world's climate overall. And its impact is so extraordinary, and I think this is a little-known fact and an important fact for us to understand as we think about the relevance of Panama to the world, but also if we look on either side of that, the dynamics in the ocean on the Pacific side changed dramatically as a result, and the dynamics of the ocean on the Atlantic side. And so we have drastically different ecosystems on either side of Panama, and they're giving rise to really extraordinary changes worldwide. So the importance of Panama has really geologically been well established. And so the feature that then stands out is because of the formation of the bridge that the species moving southward from North America and northward from South America really created a tremendous richness. Now it appears that the species coming from the north to the south probably predominated, but what it did is it created the unique confluence of species that we have all been talking about here this morning. And so the ability then, if one is to preserve this, but also from the standpoint of a visitor, to experience that is really unprecedented. And so NASA, for example, has given a lot of attention to this region for that purpose. And if we go back to the building of the Panama Canal, one of the things that that brought forward as well is a tremendous confluence of peoples, again, from all around the world. So there's certainly an ecological diversity of species, but the diversity of peoples that have come to Panama in order to build the canal and then make a life has increased the richness of this area even further. So we often think in terms of, well, what are the cultural exchanges that can happen in both directions? And so many people wouldn't know that NASA became very interested in Panama back during the moon mission. And so the Gemini and the Mercury missions and the Apollo missions took advantage of the unique wilderness environment of Panama and actually brought the astronauts that were to fly to the moon down into the U.S. Air Force Tropical Survival School. And there is really quite a remarkable man, Antonio Zarco, who was the chief of the Embera tribe. And I think that comprised something like 30,000 people in that region. And he was a critical force in helping NASA build their survival program in the jungle. And there are many cases of where, like Neil Armstrong and John Glenn and other astronauts might have gotten lost in the jungle, and it was Chief Antonio and some of his people that would go in and help them find their way out. And so this was really a classic example of how an indigenous people can impart tremendous knowledge to a nation which at that time was technologically advanced in the way that we were building sophisticated rocketry to go to the moon. This is a beautiful example of this exchange of knowledge and exchange of culture. And we value that tremendously from the standpoint of a space program. And so one of the things that has been discussed here this morning is the importance of that exchange. And as we have worked both in the engineering side of space flight, but also the work of helping humans in extreme environments thrive, is how do we best interact with these kinds of cultures where we come together with them perhaps with a very different viewpoint. And so one of the things that we have tried to work on in our remote environment work is how do we engage with these cultures in a respectful way. And I believe, and we have learned, that we have to come with a certain sense of reciprocity. What is it that if we are asking for something that we would be also willing to give back? We have to bring a sense that there's a much for us to learn as we interact in these environments. And then we would ask, well, what are their needs in the situation? Not simply what can we get, but what are the needs of these individuals? And so one of the things that we've learned is that if you bring a sense of reverence, and Minister spoke about this earlier, we have the ability to participate with them rather than simply observe them. And so once we are able to engage from a sense of participation, that which we can give and that which we can receive is really heightened. And so we think there is a training or the ability to develop a knowledge base around, well, how do you interact with indigenous peoples in such a way that they can both gain from us, we can gain from them. And as a final note on that, we believe that one of the things that is going to get people to care about the environment is to care about the species and the people that live in those environments. That these are not abstract things, and these are not concepts. These are actually real people, real creatures that we can actually engage in. And we believe that when you have those kinds of experiences, that is when true transformation can take place. And so that brings us to a final point, and that is our view of transformative tourism based on readiness. Well, what does that really mean? We have brought a lot of people in our work into very remote regions, and we're working on things like commercial spaceflight, which has got regular people like you would see coming into Panama, going into an extreme environment. So how do we help them become more adept at thriving in that environment so that they have an optimum experience and so that they enter that with a sense of thriving? And so what we have begun to develop in collaboration with ATP and Geoversity are these programs that would help people to thrive in those kinds of environments. So for example, we have been developing for this specific program a wilderness first responder training program, which essentially would provide training to the guides so that any guide that would go out taking individuals from the public into these remote areas would have sufficient wilderness medicine training to be able to meet the safety needs, be able to evacuate if necessary. Then there are the cultural training, which we'll talk about later, and I think Klaus will speak to that briefly. But how do we train in the other elements of that besides medicine that would help someone thrive in that environment? And then finally, we have expeditionary behavior training and expeditionary fitness training. So one of the questions we always have is, if somebody is entering one of these remote environments, are they prepared, and how do we help them become prepared? We have seen from our work extensively that there could be a 10 to 20 or 30% difference in someone's ability to thrive as a tourist in these environments, and we know how to help them with those things. So part of what's going to become important in a tourism model like this is, how do we help the individuals with pre-preparation come into those environments so that they can thrive, they can have the optimum experience. And so when they interact with the guna or they interact with the imbra, that they are feeling physiologically robust, they've managed their way through the jungle or through the marine areas, and they are thriving in their own right. And also, how can we then use that training to help them thrive as a team together and build a kind of cohesiveness so they have a natural group experience? And so those are part of the training opportunities that we want to give to the individuals who are attending. So both those who are leading and those who are attending. And with that, I'll hand that over. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schmidt, for that enlightening and fascinating discussion. And now I'd like to introduce Max Bayo of Mission Blue.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a very huge pleasure for me to be here with all of you, Minister. Thank you so much for the invitation to the Smithsonian. It's an amazing institution. I've been having the pleasure to live in this city for almost 10 years, and I really appreciate, and I tell you, my kids in particular, they really love it. I told them this morning I was coming here, and they were like, why, we want to go with you. So I want to start with my colleague, friend, and my hero. So we're going to show a little video, the video of Sylvia Earle talking to you.
I'm truly honored to be a part of the discussion taking place, and really want to salute those of you assembled for gathering together to imagine how in Panama, already a country demonstrating considerable care for land, sea, and the people who live in this remarkable place blessed with 2 oceans. I have been honored, been my pleasure to come to Panama many times, starting before, well, 1967 was my first visit on both sides of the isthmus, diving in the Perlas Islands on one side and on the islands on the other, and the coast as well, at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. So over the years, I've been a witness to changes, not only in Panama, but globally. All of us who've been around for more than a decade or two have been witnesses to the time of remarkable discoveries about the ocean, about our relationship to nature, about climate, about the importance of maintaining diversity, the fabric of life that makes Earth a special place in the universe. Also been a witness to tragic decline. It's evident everywhere. It's certainly evident in Panama where the populations of sharks, of tunas, of grouper, swordfish, the big predators, but also some of the smaller fish as well. Not just in Panama, but globally. Why? Because we're really good at finding, catching, and marketing them. But here we are, early in the 21st century, and now we know the importance of having large areas of the land and large areas of the sea maintained with high levels or full protection to recover what has been lost. And now that we know what we could not know back when I began exploring the ocean in Panama and elsewhere in the world, that there are limits to what we can extract. We are now not only witnessing, we are causing decline on a planetary scale, and we know the cause. Look in the mirror. We humans have been taking from nature, and it has fostered our prosperity. If we continue to prosper, we must globally do more of what Panama is doing right now to embrace the land, embrace the people, embrace the ocean with enhanced care. It sounds like a slogan, 30 by 30, 30% of the land, 30% of the ocean to be fully or highly protected by 2030. But this is more than a slogan. This is reality. We must protect nature as if our lives depend upon it, because they do. So 30% of the ocean, 30% of the land in the next 10 years, is that realistic? Do we have a choice? If we want to have what we now have, only even better, it's not a choice. It's a mandate. And it's maybe not enough. That 50% by 2050 is the new call for action. On our watch, this sweet spot in time, knowing what is now known that we could not know decades ago, centuries ago, millennia ago, even the smartest people who have ever lived in the past could not know what the children of today have available to them, knowing we must take care of the natural systems that shape planetary climate, that govern the cycles, the chemistry of the planet. We have the knowledge. What we need now, most of all, is the will to understand that the world that existed before, even as recently as the middle of the 20th century, has undergone rapid change. It's not the same planet, so rules, regulations, even habits, customs that we thought were okay 50, 60, 70 years ago, today, we must look with fresh eyes, with new understanding, and embrace the future with enthusiasm, knowing that we can be that generation that will make the difference, not just for the next 10 years, but for the next 10,000 years. So bravo to all of you who are gathered. I wish I could be there personally, but I want to thank you and look forward to coming back to Panama as soon as possible and to continue exploring and to see you there under the ocean. Thank you.
Well, it's always very difficult to follow after Sylvia. I was with her a couple of days ago. She sent a big hug to everyone, and she's trying to travel a little bit less. She just became 86 years old, but is still a great diver, amazing person in many ways. And I really thank you for this invitation for her to speak here. I think it's very relevant that we're talking about Panama, who's, a very small country at many eyes, but at the same time a huge country for what it does. It connects two continents, making it one, but also connects with people. I spent a lot of time in Panama, always very happy to go back there. And it connects now with the new sort of world we want to really create. We are in a crisis. We all know that we are in a big crisis, the climate change, the biodiversity crisis. It's knocking at our door. And I think what Panama have done by now, it is an incredible progress for the world. Few weeks ago, I had the pleasure to be at the Presidential Palace when we launched, and the President Cortizo actually signed the Marine Protected Area of Coiba Range, or Cordillera de Coiba. This is an incredible act, not only because it gets Panama to the 30%, so it's only 2 countries in the whole continent to get to the 30%. It's also proud that Chile is the other one. I'm from Chile, and Panama. And I think it shows that we don't have to wait for the actual agreement at the CBD, at the Convention of Biodiversity. We can do it now. Why do we need to wait for that to happen, actually? Science is there, is telling us that this is the kind of thing that we need to do. My good friend Hector Guzman, who you probably know very well, is one of the most productive scientists on earth, actually, but it's someone who's been driving most of this, not only in Panama, but in the region. I want you to stay tuned, because what Panama did also is been encouraging other countries to do exactly the same. And we might, and I think more than we might, but soon probably we will have good news about how we can actually work beyond jurisdictions. It is important to remember that nature have no borders. And I think tourism is probably one of the best examples kind of combining with that, because people want to go everywhere. They want to feel like they belong to Panama, they belong to the countries, they go to other cultures. And I think that connected with these animals that travels beyond jurisdictions. Hammerhead sharks that goes to Cordillera de Coiba. Hammerhead that goes to Malpelo, that goes to Galapagos, that goes to Cocos Island. How do we then, we are able to protect beyond that? And beyond also national jurisdiction in the high seas, which is the other border. 60% of the ocean of the world is in the high seas. And we still have a big thing to do there. I really appreciate what Panama has been doing. Just a few days ago, the Minister of Foreign Affairs was talking about this cooperation and calling the countries to do their part on protecting this. Panama cannot do it alone, because it needs all these other countries too to protect these species and processes. But also the President Cortizo in the last summit of the Americas for the climate change just mentioned again that Panama is a blue leader. And I'm very proud to say that it is a huge blue leader in the world. And I think we need to keep shining that path that is about changing the world, and in particular our relation with nature. So thank you so much for the invitation and to be talking here with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Max, and please thank Dr. Sylvia Earle on our behalf for that wonderful presentation. She is an inspiration to us all in so many ways. And now I would like to call on Dr. Tamsin Woolley Barker, founder and principal of Team Innovation Group and Dean of the Geoversity School of Biodiversity Leadership.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm a primatologist by training, evolutionary biologist, so I got my start, in tropical ecology, and Barrow, Colorado was always, a great destination, so it's a real honor to be here. Just starting with a blue morpho butterfly, these are, everywhere in our Mammonie campus for Geoversity. It's a 12,000 acre wildlife preserve, but it's also our campus where we teach biocultural renewal. We host scientists, we host the Smithsonian scientists, and it's very exciting. So being an evolutionary biologist, I'm also a biomimicry professional. So what we do is we do innovation inspired by nature. So with the morpho butterfly, it's not actually a blue butterfly. It's a structure that's in the scales that reflects the light that causes this blue color. So it's non-toxic, it's life-friendly, and these are the kind of innovations that like Qualcomm is using now in their screens to make low-light screens. And there's all kinds of innovations we can borrow from these creatures. So what we always ask is, how does nature do it? And how nature adapts to change. You know, we've got climate problems, we've got biodiversity challenges, and people are suffering on the ground. How does nature solve those kind of problems? Through diversity. So Panama is really the hot spot for that. That's really ground zero for diversity. Oops, did I go the wrong way? Here, help me out. How do I go for it? Oh, thank you. All right. So how does nature do it? You know, so adaptation, it does it through diversity, but in terms of regenerating places, which is what we would like to see, it does it through community and connection. So here you see these glorious coral reefs, which Panama is so blessed with, and you can see it's teeming with life, diverse kinds of species all gathering around. And that's what we want to see. And now as a biomimic, those ideas get turned into all kinds of innovations. So here, the coral reefs are inspiring carbon sequestration technologies through concrete, the way that the coral reefs do. So it's very inspiring, hopeful, and educational. And of course, Panama's ground zero for that kind of diversity and community. And I think that's a really great model for the tourism conservation research that we have that potential for community and partnership. You know, the coral reefs are, they are a partnership between the algae, which is generating sugars, and then the animal that lives in the reef is creating the home and fertilizing the plants. So it's a partnership, much like what we're talking about with this regenerative tourism initiative. And we know that living systems are sustainable, life-friendly. You can see that these termite mounds are maintaining their cities the same way that we do, except that they're using zero fossil fuels. So these things have been done. They can be done, and they are being done. So it's up to us to look at these models. So, gee, I'm not very good at this. So I had the delight to actually teach a workshop on biomimicry in Panama at our Geoversity campus, our Mamani campus. And it was really exciting to me. This was in February 20, right before the pandemic started. But getting to teach entrepreneurs about biomimicry in this ground zero place for diversity and connection was just really exciting to show how nature adapts and changes. And it was just really blew their minds, and they came up with all kinds of ideas on carbon sequestration and all this, and it was all inspired by the organisms that we saw. And so my overarching theme that I was telling them about was that nothing makes sense except in light of evolution. So the way that we've been designing everything is for efficiency. You know, there's one best answer and we design for it, but that designs all the diversity out. So here we are in this state where we're eroding cultures, we're eroding diversity, and it's for efficiency. But now we know that if we want to have resilience, if we want to have regeneration, we're going to need to go to this more evolutionary model where we're, favoring diversity, we're favoring connection. So it's important, I think, to get these tourists out there to have that insight and that experience and have that hope to see that these systems are doing that and that we are nature and that we can do that as well. So I was lucky enough, as I was doing this workshop, right back to back with that was this Earth Vision transcontinental journey. So this is the narrowest part of the Americas. And these were indigenous climate activists, and they were able to, human-powered, travel across Panama. So it's really exciting to be able to go all the way across the Americas in this spot. And so these were indigenous climate activists. They were from North America, and they got to go through the autonomous territory, the Hunayala, and it was really moving for them to see lands maintained and monitored by indigenous people, and to see that potential was really galvanizing for them. And then it was exciting to me too, because seeing that these these rainforests are anthropogenic forests. They've been maintained for thousands of generations. So this evolutionary thinking that I'm teaching, these indigenous people already have that. And so, evolution works by, making more of what is already working. So this model really does that. We know that indigenous groups are already stepping forth for our land management and stewardship. So that is something to work with. So these are some of the things that we do at Geoversity that we think are important for cultivating this biocultural renewal. Bringing people out into places full of diversity and connection, experiencing living systems, the way they adapt and the way they innovate and regenerate, learning how to do regenerative design, and then biocultural renewal, just the importance of regenerating these spiritual practices and these practices for regenerating the land and the cultures. And so what we were able to do at Mamani is, this is a friend of mine, Hugo Araujo from Seven Vortex. And he's a biomimic like myself, so we have worked together for 10 years. And he had this virtual Gaia concept of monitoring on the ground the health of the ecosystem. And so we went into Mamani, and what better way to collect this data than to have indigenous people on the ground do the citizen science? And because they know the land and they care about it. So here we have some, this is one of our guides, and she is a regenerative tourism guide. She learned some biomimicry, and she was able to tell us about all kinds of things. And so what we did, we have this app where people can not only collect this information on the ground, but they can also acquire certifications. They can learn about biomimicry. And so now they're able to connect with tourists directly or through a tourism industry where their special knowledge can be conveyed. Here's another one of our guides. And I mean, the history in the area, they know the trees, they know the stories of the trees, they have the relationships with the organisms. And so here's looking at this app, again, they can see their own personal impact, they can have a personal learning journey, and they can also connect through a cryptocurrency exchange with seeds with tourists that would actually want their services. So here's one of those biocultural renewal events that we did. We had this gentleman from the Kuna was there, and they were teaching us how to make tamales in the traditional way. But he brought actually cheesecloth to do it. And we thought, oh, well, what, didn't you use something else before? And he said, oh, yeah, we used a leaf, but I don't know what it is anymore. My grandmother knew. And Esmeralda knew the leaf and knew where to find it. So we went, we found the leaf, and they actually did it the traditional way. And he was so excited to be able to make them for his grandmother later and have that, the renewal of that culture. It's very exciting. And I think that's what we're really kind of after, that partnership. So I think that if you look now, these regenerative circles are all over Latin America, and everyone's looking to this model as a way to regenerate places and to regenerate diversity and connection that we need to change the world once more. Whoa, did I end it? Oh, I just wanted to end it on a great slide. We are actually, thank you. I'm a biologist. All right, well, picture, if you will. I just wanted to end with the mola on the bamboo arc. We're working with the Huna they've got this 38-meter square sail that they're going to sail into COP26 with in display, and it's just really exciting to see that partnership between the old and the new, creating the future that we all want. Next one. There.
Oh, beautiful. Wonderful. Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tamsin, for that wonderful tour de force and rewilding and saving the last wild places. And now I would like to introduce Vern Harnish, CEO of Scaling Up. Vern?
Good. Thanks, April. So what's interesting, if you want to actually then scale anything, including the tourism, to Panama, first you have to make sure you're on the right wave. This weekend I was surfboarding, boogie boarding with my son Quinn over at Rehoboth Beach. And it just was a great reminder that if you hit the wave right, it was beautiful. If you missed it, it was disastrous. It hurt, really bad. And the great news is all of the data points that tourism is hugely on the rise, and that ecotourism, a study that was just put out 3 weeks ago, showed that 86% of people care now. I think it's as a result of what's happened with the pandemic. It's really raised the awareness of the tourists around this idea. So I think first the good news is we've caught a good wave, and maybe that's the time to do it. But what's critical is, and it was research we did at MIT in terms of scaling up tech companies, is it requires one function, and that is marketing. And if you got a group of techies together and they launched, it didn't go any place. But if you got a group of techies together and you had a marketing person, then it would scale quite effectively. So the question becomes, what is the most effective way to market? And in the Q&A piece, I'm going to share a couple of examples. But one of them that came out of my second book was a very simple idea that Intel used to create Intel Inside. I mean, if you think about it, everybody keeps talking about Panama as the best kept secret. It's this jewel that nobody knows about. Well, nobody knew what an IC chip was. And it was buried inside computers. Yet Intel, and I thought it was one of the greatest kind of business stories, is how did that board decide that at some point, and how did they test it to know it would work, that they'd spend $250 million on a marketing campaign to convince consumers that it actually mattered what the chip was inside that device. And as a result, today they have 86% of that global market for those devices. And that's precisely why we're bringing groups of executives down to Panama, because nature is scaled in ways that none of us humans have ever been able to contemplate. It's one of the reasons why we're excited. And a magical date, February 22nd, 2022 at 2:22 p.m. in the Museo, which I hope you guys can appreciate, is like the arch is for St. Louis and the Statue of Liberty is for the U.S. I mean, you've got like this, the image that these two global organizations representing like 42,000 influential CEOs, the image that they have chosen to anchor this program is the Museo, because of Frank Gary's reputation around the planet and just how colorful it is, which seems to be part of what Panama represents. And it was Tamsin that really taught me that, and it was a piece that she wrote here recently, that, and it's what we think informs how to scale tourism, is that nature never sees a problem. And I think that's very important to think about. Nature only sees potential. And that's where you have to start with this conversation. To the extent it turns into conflict, we know that's not going to be helpful at all. And ultimately, what nature has taught us, and present company included here, if there's two words that have kind of made me throw up in my mouth over this last 18 months, I know it's kind of a bad visual, but I do that on purpose, is the term expert. Every time I read expert says, I really want to lose it in the news, CNN, Fox, whoever it is. And we sort of bounced around here, but I'm glad we kind of corrected it, is the word resilient. You don't want to be resilient. That means you got to really push hard and fight through the pain. What nature is anti-fragile. And I watched the new Marvel movie last night with my son, which is spectacular. And it's going to be a great way to continue to push the idea that indigenous people are powerful, and the stuff that we're doing with James Cameron and all of that through that media to the millennials really reach that marketplace. But what you discover is that it's the wisdom of the crowd that really informs. If I think about when I used to look for a restaurant, let's just get really practical. You know, I'm looking for a place to vacation, I'm looking for a restaurant. I used to go to Fodor's, and that was written by experts who we just discovered later on were just paid under the table, which tends to be what most experts are. Instead, today, we trust the crowd. We go to TripAdvisor. We all go to Amazon because we trust the crowd to give us real truth around which one of the 20 options we ought to be choosing. So this is really point number one, and that's how hives and ant colonies work. And so to be resilient is to have a shield that, as it takes hits, it's able to survive until it can't. If it's anti-fragile, the more it takes hits, the stronger it gets. And so to build an approach to sustainability where the more tourists we bring in, because that's the concern here, the more tourists we bring in, we risk the biodiversity, we risk these cultures, when in truth, if we say, how could we make that anti-fragile as a question? And that's what I love the Smithsonian. We're the same way. It's the question, not the answer, that matters. So point number two is it requires a deep understanding of influence. And there, the gurus, Dr. Robert Cialdini, I didn't say expert, he's one of the first to say that it really relies on the crowd. And he's got two very important books that I think will inform us here. He just updated his classic after a decade called Influence, May 5th it came out, where he's found a seventh key to influencing. And that's really the tools that we want to use. And you were right, it's through influencers, Yvonne, that this works. And then he wrote a very important book called Persuasion. It's interesting, even the images you use on a website that are in the background influence whether somebody will choose it to be a sustainable experience or not. And by the way, a lot of his research informed hotels that now have all of us hanging our towels, right? I don't throw it on the ground, I hang it. But they studied how they could get us to change our mass behavior around that very simple idea. So that would be a couple of the resources. And then last, what we ultimately have learned from nature is, and it goes back to this no problem but constraint, is that if you look at a river going from Everest to the ocean, it has a very simple rule. And by the way, there are no straight lines in nature. I only see those on hockey stick projections of startups. Nature always seeks the easy path. And what attracted me initially to Panama over Costa Rica, for instance, was the ease of travel there. You guys have another jewel called Copa, run by our dear friend Pedro Heilbronn. And the fact that, and so ultimately when Nathan and I got together to co-found Geoversity, we understood that the essence of brand, and look, we see luxury brand creating, not that it matters, that one of the wealthiest humans on the planet, and how the luxury brands thrived in the pandemic, is brand really comes down to owning a word or two. And the essence of Panama is we have the most accessible jungle. I mean, if you want to, and you can experience a forest, but if we can get the message out that a jungle is a 100x experience, and that's what people are looking for. And then we express the fact that it is the most accessible jungle. It's like so much easier to go ski at Park City than it is at Vail. And Park City's done a great job of, you land in Salt Lake, you're there in 45 minutes. You land at Panama City Airport, you're in the jungle in 45 minutes. And that is significant. The fact we have the US dollar instead of any other currency that, sorry, folks up in this country are weird about that. And we've got standard electrical plugs. I mean, the extent that you can show the easy path And so ultimately what it comes down to is I found some interesting research that was done by some Greek researchers into tourism. And what they found is you always want to find the constraint. And if you can control the constraint, control's a weird word, but if you can really understand the constraint and be deeply involved with it. And so what they found is the key is tour operators. You get the right handful of tour operators and you get them on the sustainability kick. We're doing it at our CO boot camps with no bottled water. Then they're your leverage point. And the great news is they formed this group, TOI, that now has been absorbed by another group that I hope didn't kill it. But the tour operators, if you find the right 5, they can influence the millions and to both make sure it's sustainable and to get folks there. So I think that's my quick, in my Q&A I'll share a couple of real important case studies around tourism that answer that question about then how do we use social media in order to really make this happen, and how do you become the intel inside, and which is where I think Panama has the opportunity to move. So.
Thank you, Vern, for that very practical approach to bringing Panama forward as a very accessible place. And as you say, nature seeks the easiest path. Thank you for that. And now I'd like to call upon Bruce Poon-Tip, founder of Planetara and G Adventures.
Thank you. Good morning. Great to be here. First, let me thank the Authority of Tourism of Panama and the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Love this discussion. And you know what I love about it most is the expanded spectrum of success on how we define sustainability. One of the issues that we have, one of the biggest issues we face as a planet is obviously climate change. And that's a very big issue that's on the front pages of all media. It's got very good PR, but what doesn't have great PR is other ways in which we can define what sustainability means, whether that's cultural heritage preservation, poverty alleviation, and they're talking about biocultural heritage here. As a tour operator, and I represent tour operators here, I guess, today and on the travel industry, this is something that has concerned us for 30 years. It's not that we're not concerned about environment and climate change, because it's obviously a very important issue to all of us, but when it comes to tourism and how tourism can impact the world, poverty alleviation and cultural heritage preservation, all of these things that we're talking about are equally important when it comes to responsible and sustainable development through tourism. And the travel industry in general misses that opportunity every day by not embracing that ability to be a transformational industry. So I love this discussion where we can create a roundtable to discuss an expanded spectrum of how we define success, around biodiversity and cultural heritage. It's the first time I've ever heard a discussion like this, so congratulations to Panama, and that's why I agreed to come here. I'm from Canada. We're very locked down there. I almost had to escape Canada to get here. So it was worth coming, and right after this I have to go get tested so I can break back into my country to get home. Marginalized communities around the world are vulnerable to commercial activity. Whenever there's commercial activity, communities, and especially indigenous communities, are vulnerable because they see it as a magic way to create jobs, and often it's a silver bullet. And so creating standards and being in a dialogue about creating standards is why I came today. And I know we're talking about Panama, and I just want to reiterate before I go off about this is bigger than Panama. I love Panama too. Panama is a beautiful country. I've been there a couple times with my family, and one of the most beautiful countries in the world. Everything that's been said, I can say from experience. a diverse country that has so much to offer, and the hidden gem. I don't like these kind of marketing statements, but it truly is everything that's been said today. So I'll just say that as a fan and as a traveler that's been to Panama. The speaker before me mentioned things they don't like to hear, like expert. The thing, as coming out of this pandemic, the thing that, makes me throw up a little bit is, getting back to normal. I don't think we should be fighting to get back to normal when it comes to tourism. Just pre-pandemic, I don't think tourism was in a very good place. There is a constant push for infinite growth in tourism, a push for capacity, bigger and bigger, whether it's ships, compound resorts, and people were no longer connected to destinations. And this is a dangerous place for us to be in travel. If you look at any brochure by an operator, they're pushing amenities. It's a distraction from the destination. It's all about thread counts on sheets, the fact that you can have 10 different restaurants, you can have a Broadway show, you can, indoor zip lining, indoor surfing, whatever it is, to create a distraction. The destination becomes secondary to your decision as a traveler. And this is a very dangerous place for travel. There's an outrageous video that I show recently of a cruise ship that does cruises to Alaska, and just before the pandemic they launched that they've cleared one deck of the cruise ship to put a full-sized go-kart track in an Alaskan cruise, because you wouldn't want to go to Alaska and give up your aggressive go-kart hobby, I guess. So when we get into a situation where the destination becomes irrelevant, it's very dangerous for many reasons. For us in the travel industry, it's especially dangerous, but it's also dangerous for communities and local communities that benefit from tourism. People are going to some of the poorest countries in the world. Of the 40 poorest countries in the world, tourism generates more revenue than oil. Yet, a small part of that money actually stays, and a decreasing amount of that money actually stays in the local economy. So this is the opportunity that is missed every day in the travel industry to be a transformational industry that can change lives, because people are traveling on luxury holidays to the poorest countries on the planet, and local communities aren't benefiting. So the COVID and the data that we're seeing right now is that travelers are changing. They're changing how they travel. And the best thing that could happen on the other side of COVID, we have a saying at G Adventures is never waste a good pandemic, because we want people to think differently, and we're showing how they're even searching on our website, and the data showing that they're much more purposeful and meaningful in where they want to go, and actually want to go to this country over that country, as opposed to being attracted to destinations or the dates that work. And because we're constantly pushing for more capacity as an industry, we're suddenly having to fill that capacity, and suddenly price point becomes everything in deciding where they want to go. And as a travel industry, we're constantly pushing out deals and sales because we're competing against growing capacity. It's a huge issue. And suddenly, again, you get more and more disconnected from the destination, and it's no longer relevant where you go. The amenities become more important. So, if anything happens after this pandemic, and because of and creating standards, from this conversation, it's a really exciting opportunity that we don't want to miss. And it's because we're seeing that travelers are more open and compliant than ever before. As a tour operator, I started G Adventures in 1990. 31 years, I think, actually tomorrow. As a company, I've spent all of my years pandering to customers, pleasing customers, and we've run. I think we're running our 1,000th trip coming up in a couple weeks, and I've never seen passengers more open and responsive than right now. And it's the perfect time to educate those consumers on what it takes to be more responsible and how we define sustainability in the future. People are pushing more and more remote communities. People want to be, in an increasingly wired world, people want to be disconnected. And And we're seeing more and more of that. And the idea just before the pandemic hit, do you remember this catchphrase, over-tourism was all the rage? And that's that young Swedish teenager, Greta, was talking about, carbon emissions and flights and flight shaming. These are all serious issues, but when they talk about over-tourism, they talk about it for Venice. Just checking my time, not my emails. They talk about Venice or Machu Picchu or areas, the Great Wall of China, where mass amounts of people convert a historic and beautiful place into more of an amusement park. But when you define over-tourism as people push into more remote communities, over-tourism suddenly becomes, it could be 20 to a small community. Regular groups to small Amazon communities or jungle communities. It doesn't have to be hundreds of thousands of people to define it as over-tourism. So I don't think anyone is looking at how you define over-tourism except using Venice as an example of millions arriving every week and that's over-tourism for that region because it's more of an amusement park than it is. I actually did an article 2 weeks ago about that Venice is going to start charging admission on the other side of this pandemic. You actually have to pay to enter. So the transformation is complete. It is an amusement park. But when you're pushing into more remote communities, suddenly how you define over-tourism has to be redefined as well. And having those discussions is very, very important. I'm just going to end because I know we have questions, and I'll speak more about some of our experience with working with communities around the world. But we talk about transformational tourism, regenerative travel. These are all kind of new words that are coming up about travel. But the industry itself, the travel industry itself, has to embrace that first. It's easy, there's constant pressure being put on operators in indigenous communities to deliver for travelers. And on the other side of this pandemic, it has to be the education of the customer. And so I want to make sure that discussion is had when we're talking about putting together standards, because you often put together standards that pressures communities, but ultimately, the traveler has to change their mindset. I think we have that opportunity on the other side of this pandemic. Travel is a privilege and it's not a right, and that mindset has to change. In order to do that, the travel industry first has to be educated, and that's from the common travel agent to Airbnb to Expedia, anyone who sells travel has to be able to educate the consumer. And the consumer's never been more receptive than right now to accept change, because everyone wants to travel and they're willing to do anything to get that ability to travel again. And it's an amazing opportunity for us as an industry. And it's an important discussion today, but I want to make sure that that everyone, when these discussions are had, that we talk about how we get the traveler to make those right decisions, because we can do everything we want on the ground. If we don't find the market for it, it's pointless. And there's a graveyard of projects around the world that never attracted the travelers. And the speaker before me talked about marketing, and that's also important. But the realities of knowing your market is one thing, but the market itself has to know what they want. And we have the ability right now to shape their thought. And Panama leading this discussion it's bigger than just Panama. Like creating standards, and Panama being thought leaders in this area, I think is fantastic. And so I'm just happy to be here to share that, and I'll answer some of the questions after. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you so much. In fact, there is a beautiful paradise in Panama called Bocas del Toro, which has been loved too much by tourists. And it's a hope spot where Mission Blue is working, and perhaps Max can tell us something about that when we come back, because we're going to have a 10-minute break. But I just want to leave you with one thought to echo what Bruce has said. Bocas del Toro is a small archipelago and is home to just 16,000 residents. In 2012, they hosted 225,000 tourists. And today, the coral reefs are finally being restored. So the overloving of a beautiful, pristine place and a paradise has its terrible results. The combination of cosmetics and suntan lotion using oxybenzone destroys coral reefs. And today we've got the results, and hopefully when we build back better, when we come back from the post-pandemic phase, Bocas del Toro will survive and be a pristine place once again. Thank you. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
pasar. Vivimos en la carretera. Piensa en la luz del mar. Las caras de tu elegancia me visten de color azul. Pueden verme entrar a casa. Y aquí me han visto crecer. Me han enseñado también. Y me han perdido de vista. Nunca he quedado solo. Siempre estuviste en mis mañanas, en casa siempre. aquí me han visto crecer, me han enseñado también y me han perdido de vista. Nunca he quedado solo. Siempre estuviste en mis mañanas. En casa siempre hay que comer. Y cuando el sol en mi ventana se fue. Y aquí me han visto crecer, me han enseñado también y me han perdido de vista. Nunca he quedado solo. Hoy los tengo a todos. Hoy te tengo a ti.
Ladies and gentlemen, could I ask you to please take your seats so we can start? My card? Oh, yes, okay, I guess I can, I definitely will give you my card. Yes. Here is,
So nice. I mean, being friends with Alex, I love Alex.
oh, they're absolutely charming. It's a wonderful family.
Oh my God. And I got to meet them all now.
Yes.
The whole tribe.
And you met the dad,
Yeah.
Dave.
And we're like, yeah, we were dancing. It was a beautiful party. It was just amazing. Amazing. I'm so happy. I'm so proud. I mean, incredible.
Oh, isn't that marvelous? I'm so happy to hear that. That's wonderful. Well, I really think we could do something great in Panama with Patagonia and Mission Blue and Bocas and just, elevate the whole story because it could become a model of how to save, how to restore and then how to preserve rather than let the tourists come back and overlove it again. Can't do that. Okay, fantastic, good. Ladies and gentlemen, could I ask you to take your seats so we can start and resume our discussion?
Recognizing the people holding their hands up? Who's going to do that? Because I want to hold my hand up and not get ignored.
Oh, no, of course. I think that Lynette is going to do that. Let me just double check who's doing that. I forgot.
Who's going to say who can speak?
I am.
Any other places called Lynette? Yeah, Metropolitan Plus. Yeah, Metropolitan Plus. What's it? Like 5 minutes car ride? Or? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, who gives who assigns the questions from you or?
Yeah. So raise your hand and wait for a staff member to hand you the microphone. So they're going to be roaming with the microphone, and they're going to hand you the microphone. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. And now I would like to hand back to Dr. Sanhur, who will moderate our panelists and our question and answer time. Dr. Sanhur.
Thank you, April. All right. Thank you, April, and thanks, everybody. Thank to our panelists. This has been quite an amazing session. I think we have learned so much from each of them. And now we're getting ready to the second part of our roundtable. What we're going to do in the next, during the next hour or so is we're going to actually go to each of the panelists to ask an additional question so they can actually provide and expand in some of the interesting topic that we're dealing today regarding tourism, conservation, and research. So please let me start with Dr. Michael Smith. Michael, let me start with you. What recommendations can you give for the implementation of tourism model based on the conservation and research of biocultural heritage? Michael.
Great, thank you. One of the things I wanted to start with is maybe a couple of questions and a story. So you're probably all familiar, at least some of you have lived long enough to have seen this, but back when we were trying to conserve whales and stop whaling, it was really an uphill battle all around the world. And I believe it was Robert Ballard, and I don't know if you remember this, who it was, but correct me if I'm wrong there, did some recordings in the Atlantic of humpback whales. And there were a lot of whales in that community, and it was really the first rich recording of humpback whales, obviously underwater, that we had ever seen, and it was many of them. And when he published that, the whole world changed around conservation of whales. It was almost like there was a connection that was made between the human population and the whale population. They were now no longer an object. They were sentient. They were creative. The sounds were different. There was just something that became personally, I would call it personally meaningful for individuals. And you probably have heard then that was made into a record, and the record was extraordinarily successful. And that gets kind of back to Vern's point in one way, that was a kind of a marketing of the whales, and suddenly people had an interest in them, an interest in conservation, and then an interest in seeing them. So that was really probably a bright point in our interaction with the natural world, and I think there's a lesson there. And so I'm going to pose a couple of questions, though, and maybe a couple of challenges. And one of them has to do with, so when we get back to some of the other comments that we've had here about, let's say, over-tourism and things like that, there's a study I want to share that I think we should think about as we're trying to advance this kind of initiative, but that really goes for tourism of any kind. And that is, there's been an ongoing study conducted at the University of Michigan that's looked at empathy. And so they've been using empathy, or let's call it empathic concern, based on the particular study models, and then perspective taking. And so if they follow the trends in empathy and empathic concern, perspective taking over the decades, and this is a 30-year study now, it has actually fallen quite a lot. And where it's particularly fallen is in the young people. And so if you look at the trajectory, it really changes whether you're looking at older populations, but increasingly now this group that is in college right now, let's say, or in their 20s, it's fallen by roughly 40%. And so this is really an issue to be considered as we're trying to formulate how we engage people in tourism, how we get them to consider the ecological niche, the biome, we get them to consider indigenous peoples and things like that, because that is not something that just occurs naturally if you lack empathic concern. It is something that has to be developed and inculcated and, you could say, trained. So as we think about how are we going to engage this next generation of tourists in these kind of environments, how do we address that issue of empathy? Because that will be one of the critical things for them to understand of how to interact with the living environments and the people in those environments. So that's just a point of reference that I think is really useful for us to consider, because I think we will have to address it. So, because when we get to these thoughts of, as you were mentioning, April, you get into these environments where they're just wholly overexposed. That's certainly a numbers problem, and it also may be the manner in which the people engage with those communities, and I think empathy comes into play. I would add then that on the positive side of it all, there is this trend in these younger generations becoming very interested in authenticity. So there may be a conflict of sorts with their interest in authenticity, but yet a struggle to make connections, maybe in the way that their parents' generation or beyond were able to make connections. So there's I think an impulse to move into these kinds of environments and these kind of explorations, but there may be a struggle with how to do it faithfully or how to do it empathically so that all sides are served. I think the other thing that goes along with this that really aligns with what we're trying to propose here is that probably one of the deepest needs that people have is for meaning, personal meaning. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you could say it's things like safety, sustenance, food, water, shelter. but you can do without a lot of food, water, and shelter. Well, okay, water not so much. If you have meaning. And so that is one thing perhaps to think about in the course of how this gets marketed and how we talk about scaling this and how we talk about bringing in the different features of the biome and the cultures that exist here is, you know, how do we make that personally meaningful, or how do we connect with that aspiration people have for meaning? Because you know, we understand that people like to go on on an excursion to have fun and just let it all out there. At the same time, the need for meaning doesn't necessarily get met by that kind of tourism or that kind of adventure. So I would put the need for meaning very high in sort of our conceptualization of how do we try to reach these individuals, really of any age group. That doesn't change. And then I would say one of the driving needs is human connection. And in the mobile world, in the digital world, that is lacking, right? And especially, we've talked about COVID here a little bit today. That lack of social connection, there's people who've studied the social media world with young people quite a lot, and they, in many cases, prefer texting to calling someone. And when they've been queried about it, and I'm talking about studies of this, they say because it's just not as messy as interacting face-to-face with them. And so, you know, we do have, so they have a longing for human connection, yet I think there are generations now that are struggling a bit more with it. So how do we help utilize these kinds of opportunities to build human connection, which also grows their need for meaning? It also, perhaps, if done right, can raise their capability for empathy. And so, you know, we've talked about some of this with our training programs and how you can help build this into a culture. And I'll just share one story. We deal with this in the both the expedition world and in the spaceflight world because people want to be part of something. And so I know I'm talking about a different, let's say, wealth category in some cases. But on expeditions that you typically see, it's $8,000, $10,000, $20,000. So, you know, it's usually a fairly well-off community. But what we found in these surveys of people who have gone on these expeditions, they want their participation to be meaningful in some way, like contribute to research or contribute to the well-being of the group, et cetera. And I'll just share one quick story, and that is on an expedition that we had down in the Mamadi Valley right before COVID, literally a week before COVID. There was a young man in the group that was, you know, had some medical concerns, and he was really concerned over whether or not he would make it all the way, get to the Continental Divide, and then make it the rest of the way, which is the more remote component of that. So in the course of that, I just said to him, you know, I'm here. I'm going to tell you what's going on. We're going to help you through this. And I educated him quite a bit along the way. And I said, you know, you have enough information now, you can probably start helping other people. And what happened with him, he went from being one of the most vulnerable individuals on that expedition to actually helping people when they would run into some kind of a minor problem. He was the one running to get things or offering suggestions. And so, you know, what we've found is that there is a kind of, that need for meaning can be met in some ways by helping them become part of the crew, or, you know, contributing more greatly to an expedition or an excursion rather than just being, you know, the observer. They're now really an active participant in that. And so, you know, that's not necessarily a solution for how we do this, but I wanted to share that these are, I think, some concepts that are important from the human behavior side of things, so that as we're building out sort of these marketing strategies, trying to reach individual groups, how can we appeal, number one, to these needs that they may have, and then how can we be aware of the kind of deficits they may have. So, and as a final note, you know, if we go into meeting with the Embara or the Kuna, I think it'll be important for them to have some skills in that are not just instructions, but that, you know, is there a way that we can help them develop the capacity for empathy not sympathy, but really develop some skills so that when they go in there, they're able to have that transformative experience. Then they bring that out, they take that out into the community. It's life altering, and like the reason that the expedition is called the Life Changer is because that journey inculcates that kind of experience, and then people take that outward. So I think I'll pause there and go on to your next question.
Thank you, Michael. That's actually very enlightening on that. I'd like to now turn it to Max Bello. Max, can you please share with us your thoughts on how protected areas can help mitigate climate change?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very key question that we've been discussing for a while. As you may know, in all of these years of discussion of climate change, ocean have not been part of the negotiations. They're not part of the convention. They're not part of the agreement, which we should be surprised. 70% of the planet is actually covered. If you would think about where life is coming, where life is coming in this planet itself, it is from the ocean. It is the biggest mitigator. It is it's been producing at least 50% of the oxygen historically in this planet. So it is key for us to understand what is the role, and the more we actually go understanding, the more we find. And so we've been talking about the blue carbon now, and we've done some research. Actually, you guys here at Smithsonian have some good friends here working on mangroves. I also connect them with the Pew Charitable Trust, so they're working together in some other areas. The seagrass and other ecosystems are huge, but now, for example, we've here the IMF researcher and mathematician, actually, Ralph Chami did a study about the whales and how much whales also sink carbon. Well, obviously, we are made out of carbon. I mean, the problem is not the carbon, it's us. How we are putting carbon into the atmosphere. But every single, life, individual here in this planet actually is basically made out of carbon. So if you take those life from the ocean, of course, you're going to also release the carbon. You're not only affecting those ecosystems, but you are taking that carbon outside, fisheries and others. No, we came to realization, that we could save whales, that we could actually also profit on seeing whales. Panama have a huge industry of whale watching. But now we're thinking, well, there are massive sort of pumping, machines of carbon. And from krill to algae to everything, it is too. So when you think about the protection, and in particular this kind of protection that is big marine protected areas, they're not only protecting small features or species that have very short range of movement, but you actually have even processes that they're considered into the whole ecosystem. And those features are extremely key for maintaining a healthy ocean. That healthy ocean will continue providing what we kind of give it for granted until now, I guess, and improving that, taking some of the activities that are threatening these areas are key for maintaining those species. So let me tell you, for example, in this region, there's a huge extraction of different species, tuna mainly, and then also with that, a lot of shark. So if we take some of those activities out, those sharks, those species that live around where sharks are part of that ecosystem will continue living and doing what they do. And we are now studying that, for example, highly and fully protected areas, which is what Panama did, are the kind of like golden standard of marine protected areas, can actually work better because with this protection, then finally those ecosystems will continue doing their part. And just as a number, most of these areas, highly and fully, can actually provide 7 times more biomass than any other marine protected area. That means that fish, it's growing, it's sinking carbon, and it's maintaining, healthy ocean, which will maintain also healthy populations in the coastland, or fishermen or other things. So I think it's something that we came to the realization very lately. There are more discoveries now. Like now we're seeing kelp forest studies that shows that actually kelp forests can actually sink carbon at least 20 times more than any other ecosystem on Earth. So by unlocking all of this information, like Smithsonian is doing, and also the protection that places like Panama are providing, then probably we will find a bigger solution to come out of this crisis. Thank you.
Mac, thank you very much for sharing with us your thoughts on climate change and how can we do better. Now, let me actually turn it to Dr. Tamsin Woolley-Barker. Tamsin, I'd like to ask you, how can innovation change the way people interact with nature?
Well, the biomimicry is a real hit, and it's at every level. It's really getting kids re-excited about STEM. And a lot of kids are intimidated by, hard sciences or math. They think they can't do it. But they love animals and they love nature. And so that gets them on the path. So that's a big factor. But also, life's processes are all life-friendly. They're all made in water. They're made with 5 elements. Carbon is the main element that they're building with. So all that carbon in the atmosphere, if we can innovate ways to bring that back to the biosphere, I think that's kind of the key thing that we're looking for. So I think the biomimicry and the innovation inspired by nature is huge, but also just the process of innovation, like just becoming familiar with the way evolution works and ecological patterns helps us design our organizations and endeavors to actually adapt faster. So I think that's important.
Tamsi, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. I'd like now to turn it to Vern Harnish, Dr. Vern Harnish. Vern, how can we use media and storytelling to change the way in which the world views science and tourism?
Yeah, I thought, Michael, you got a great example there, because it's the great news about marketing now is it's not running Super Bowl ads. It's out educating. Nobody wants to be sold. People want to be educated. And so that is the approach we're able to take. So I want to weave kind of a thought here. So the study was titled Integrating Sustainability into Tour Operator Business, an Innovative Approach in Sustainable Tourism. And so they looked at it and said, all right, the tour operators like Bruce are really critical here. And you don't have to influence a lot of them. But then they said, what are the push motivators? What are the most important factors to push tour operators into caring about sustainability, and then if we educate them, choosing Panama as a place? And what didn't work, and I think, Bruce, you were trying to allude to this, was expected regulations and licenses to operate in the destination. That was last. And second from last was becoming an environmental leader. What was first was building positive public image. That is what you want, and responding, as you said, to customer demands. So then it comes back, I think, as you suggested, that it comes down to educating the consumer. And so that's where I want to share an example from someone who's not here, but is deeply involved with this, and that's David Meerman Scott. So David's written over a dozen books on marketing. He is the marketing guru right now on the planet. And he tells the story of Cindy Gordon. in his book, The New Rules of Marketing. And Cindy was in charge. She was at Universal Orlando Resorts and launching the Wizardry World of Harry Potter theme park. Now, the old rules would have had her do lots of hundreds of millions of marketing, again, on Super Bowl ads and magazine ads and blimps and, you know, interrupting people. And nobody wants interrupted. My phone did ring while I was sitting here, and it was somebody I know that was trying to sell me car insurance or to update the warranty on my car. Instead, here's what Cindy did. She just invited in the right 7 people that she calculated could reach tens of thousands of people that were rabid about Harry Potter. Not anything else, but about Harry Potter. Who would be rabid about sustainable, tourist experience? And it brought them behind the scenes, educated them, gave them a kind of a special look. And their calculation is it ultimately reached and drove 350 million people to the website to know about the wizardry world of Harry Potter. And that's what Intel did as well. And that's what Regis McKenna taught Steve Jobs and Intel and was my coach back in '83 when I wanted to launch the world's largest entrepreneur organization. You take a piece of paper out, you make a list of influencers. So who did I call? Like the minute I got to this point in the book was my partner, Nathan Gray. Did any of you guys listen to Green Lights, Matthew McConaughey's book? I mean, if you haven't, yes, you have to listen to that book. You can't read it because he acts it out. And he hits this point where he realizes when he hit his stardom, he needed a reset. He needed to have true connection. And he chose to take a trip to the Amazon. And then he has chosen since to always go back to reset himself back in nature in order to achieve what he's done. And I'm like, there's our spokesperson. You guys have Jordana Brewster. Jordana was, born in Panama City, All My Children. She's in the latest Fast and Furious 10. Look what George Clooney did for Nespresso. It's amazing how if we can identify a handful of influencers that care about this, it can't be fake. I don't know if Jordana cares at all, but I do know Matthew McConaughey cares about nature and sustainability and those things. And somehow or another, we get them to get the word out. And then the last thing at dawned on me, we have somebody here that actually was involved in marketing Lexus. And if you think about Toyota versus Lexus, Disney versus authenticity, Apple device versus Samsung, it may be worthwhile to position Costa Rica as Disneyland. And I actually don't want people that would go to Disneyland really to hang out in my country of Panama. I'm not sure, and because they were going to bring the wrong suntan lotion for sure. Seriously, it's not going to get it maybe. But if we're the Lexus in the place where, and that's why Tesla started selling to the rich. I know it may sound strange, but that then positions you as a luxury brand, and then you can come down market in a thoughtful way. And so those are the questions really, and some thoughts that might be helpful here, so that we can maintain the tourism, but in a sustainable way. But it ultimately comes down, I think, through influence to the end user through influencers, and doing that in a thoughtful way.
Thank you so much, Vern, for your thoughts on how to market better tourism. And our last speaker of the morning is Bruce Buntip. Bruce, can you share with us your experience of governance governance model established in communities around the world to develop community tourism?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the question. We've had quite a bit of experience all over the world working with indigenous communities, local communities, First Nations. As a matter of fact, our first tour, how we started back in 1990, was in Ecuador with a gentleman by the name of Delphine. Delphine is he lives in the Amazon with his family still today. We still bring a group every month to his community. 20 years later, or 30 years later, sorry, the Pimpilala tribe. And so I went out there myself back in 1990 looking for an Amazon experience for our customers. I didn't have customers yet. Excuse me, I was researching. And I met this gentleman in the rainforest. He actually had come to town. I convinced him to let us bring people to his community. We're very good friends now. We're like brothers, actually. We speak all the time. He actually got him on a Zoom call about 3 weeks ago. I'm writing a new book, and it was quite an exercise to get him on a Zoom call. Someone had to go meet him and bring him out to a connection. And I don't know if he quite got what was happening fully. But Delphine was a good example of, and there's many different ways, and we've had successes and failures dealing with communities. There's not a single way to approach it. There's never a right and a wrong way. And so there's not a set of standards that I can tell you. But it boils down to the same things that we did all those years ago in 1990, which is about creating dialogue. That's the number one. Cultural respect, dialogue, and storytelling. I found that those are the three most important things when working with communities. The community wants to make sure that you respect their culture, and they want to know that you understand their culture. That's first and foremost. That gets you in the door. A dialogue, that will allow you to have a dialogue, and a true dialogue as equals, and not going, and you have to understand many communities aren't motivated commercially, so and then storytelling becomes the most important part. How they tell their story, and how you're going to represent them, and the trust that's built through that. I think that's why that's hard when you're a for-profit business or you're a commercial enterprise. That's the part where people stumble, because you want to tell the story your way to sell it. And the respect that's there when you tell their story is what will create a long-term trust. So from Delphine, if you can believe it, I don't know how these communities speak to each other, but we're the largest operator on the Inca Trail in the Andean in Peru. To Machu Picchu. We have about 500 employees, Andean families that we work with there. And through those two communities in Colombia, when the Wiwa tribes in northern Colombia wanted to work with the government because there was distrust from decades of distrust with the government and the community, they mentioned my name. They wanted me to broker the conversation, which I don't know how they would have got. Especially when I went out there, they were so remote that we had to take a helicopter. And I've met 2 presidents from Colombia, trying to get them to understand the delicate relationship between community and government, and the investment and time that's needed. And in Ecuador, where we've had 9 ministers of tourism in 10 years, it's very difficult to create meaningful relationships with communities when there's a constant change in government and there's 4-year mandates between elections to deliver results. That doesn't work when you want to invest in trust and communities. And then I got a call one day from the Rural Land Development Arm in Arizona here, because they wanted to use the sacred lands of the Navajo tribes. And the Navajo tribes had the same distrust. And they said they called me. They said, Bruce Puntip, we don't know who you are, but we want to speak to these people. And they said we have to speak to you to get through to them. And that's an example of a failed project that I took on as a consultant, because I went down and ran a town hall for the community, spoke to the community and looked to see their needs, and the government wasn't willing to meet their needs. And my recommendation to them was not to allow the use of their land. So building that trust is important, and you know, I have a short time here to talk, but I'm just gonna name drop a biggie here. In my first book, Loop Tale, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but the foreword was written by the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama has never written and endorsed a business book before, or wrote a foreword in a commercial book. And the lesson that I've learned from him and from conversations with him is there's a vast difference between charity and compassion. Charity teaches us, you know, we're taught to be charitable in the developed world. We see a problem when we throw money at it through donations. We have, you know, NGOs set up for every possible thing, whether it's human rights and Amnesty International, wildlife with World Wildlife Fund, you know, disaster relief with the Red Cross. It's been set up for you to donate to every cause that you could care about, and that charity, it's a good thing. I'm not knocking charity, but there's a vast jump to compassion. And when you're dealing with communities, compassion and empathy become more critical ways, as opposed to having a charity mindset that you're going to help them because you've determined that they need help. Whereas a compassion can understand the community's needs and creates action for you to understand, you know, their life, how they live, and how you can be part of that story and creating the storytelling that's needed. And you know, that's the best advice that I can give anyone who's trying to engage communities, is understand that, you know, difference between charity and compassion, create dialogue, respect their culture, and it's all about storytelling, but it's their story. It's not how you want to tell it, and it's not how your customers want to hear it. Thank you.
Bruce, thank you so much for your words. Now we have an opportunity to ask questions to our panelists. So I'm going to turn it over to April, who's going to give some instructions for the last part of our session this morning.
Okay, thank you, Urs. The discussion will now be open for questions from audience members. If you are in the room with us today, please raise your hand and wait for a staff member to hand you a microphone. If you are joining us online today, please put your question in the Q&A or chat function in the webinar, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can. I would now like to open the floor for questions, and Lynette Dutari is going to assist us with that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nathan Gray with Geoversity, and I just have to blurt, if I may, I'm in awe, frankly, with what you're presenting. I think what you're creating, ATP and team with STRI and other entities, Prom Tour, is worthy of world emulation. I think it's outstanding, and it's a struggle, and I'm not clueless about how much of an uphill battle you have. And that brings me to a question that I'd like to direct to Minister Eskilsson and to Dr. Sanghor. I'm glad my colleague and dear friend Vern mentioned the Frank Gehry designed Museo. You know, we got our Statue of Liberty, and how wonderful that Mother Liberty is recognized. But what we have at the gateway to the Interoceanic Canal, an iconic, an outstanding architectural statue to Mother Nature. How appropriate, how timely, how powerful that is. And it is languishing. It is starving for funding. It is starving for attention. It is starving for talent. And I have this basic question from the heart, 20 years in Panama, my adopted country. What can we do in the private sector to fully realize the vision, the power, and the potential of the Frank Gehry designed Museo, and do it now? That's the question. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Gray. We truly believe that the Museo is indeed a statue to Mother Nature, as you just mentioned. I think you couldn't have put it better. And we are well aware of the board of directors and the executive team's efforts to financially move forward, not only because of the pandemic, but before that. The Museo had its struggles. So as the Authority of Tourism, we really see the Museo as the sort of the seed of everything. It tells a story of Panama, the natural history of Panama. Several of our moderator, Dr. Sanjur and Dr. Smith, both mentioned the story of the rising of the isthmus and the unique and extraordinary biodiversity and ethnodiversity expressed in that colorful structure. So I think the answers to your question are probably within the opinions expressed in this panel. We've heard from Mr. Harnish from Vern on the let's say the potential that through marketing and through influencers, the right influencers, to get the right message to the right audience for this change to happen in this particular case. How do we really attract the attention from people that could actually support the Museo? So that's one key, I believe, speaking about influencing others to care about the Museo. And the other is certainly the event that also Vern mentioned that will be happening in February. We're talking about 43,000 very influential people in the planet that will be broadcasted from the Museo. So that'll be a very historical moment for the Museo, where we can have this opportunity. And one last comment is certainly the fact that because of all the, let's say, this system of heritage routes that we are developing through the Sustainable Tourism Master Plan, for all of that deployment of history, stories, and also our nature and our culture, everything that happens in Panama through the heritage routes, we are always saying that it all starts in Museo. It's the first obligated stop in the country. So we're also certain that through the work that we're doing with also Promptour, our international promotion fund, that we will really be able to raise the importance of this icon, not only for Panama, but for the world. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Carmen Gisela Vergara. I'm the Executive Director of ProPanama, and I don't really have a question. I just wanted to comment on your answer, Minister, if I may, because remember also we're soon to inaugurate a huge cruise ship terminal on the Pacific side, which is a stone throw away from the Museo. And most definitely, tourists that will come from the cruise that will be docked in that port, their first obligated stop in Panama will be the Museo. So that will also attract a lot of visitors to the Museo on the practical side of it. So just wanted to say that.
Sorry. Hi. I'm Annie Young from the Panamanian Foundation of Sustainable Tourism, and I have a question. Let me put my glasses here. What priorities are needed to address the challenges of implementing this strategy, and what gaps can be filled? You know, working in governance, legislature. What do you guys think?
Directed to, not for me, okay. All right, so basically the challenges to implementing the strategy. Well, if, as a Panamanian and a person that you are, that has been involved in the tourism sector for over 20 years, you understand that the fact that Panama right now is the hidden gem, if you want to use all the slogans that's been used, or this right now it's still an untapped potential. It's still mostly pristine. It's mostly due to the fact that the country has not focused really on this type of tourism, right? So for now, the country has been known because of our canal, which will still be an icon for the country, and also because of our modern Latin American city that's a hub of the Americas in many ways. So that fact has been the cause, and many other maybe side reasons why it hasn't been developed. So now the real challenge, once this strategy has been sort of driven forward and approved at the highest level from the cabinet, and everything is in paper, now it's a big crusade, let's say, to bring together everybody, all the main leaders, starting from taking on Bern's recommendation again, starting with the influencers, on how we can all embrace the strategy, not only because it will be aligned with what is best for our biodiversity and preserving our ethnodiversity, but because we truly believe commercially it will be the most successful strategy, taking into consideration what the market, the big shift in the market's demand is happening. So right now, in one word, it would be just aligning all of our sector and for them to embrace the strategy as their own. So that's certainly the next frontier in order for this to be happening at a local level, and then we, as you know, as we've mentioned here, our aspiration is that this model can also transcend, as Bruce also suggested, not only Panama but to other countries that are committed to this more sustainable future and a future that really meets the demand of the modern traveler, and also that can better adapt to and mitigate climate change.
Thank you. Well, we have a couple of questions here from our virtual audience, so I'm going to go ahead and read those to you. Thank you for a wonderful morning. How do we close the leakage of massive opportunities in the tourism ecosystem and move it from transactional to transformational, where travelers and operators can be investing back into the regenerative biocultural power of a place? How can Panama as a government and other governments help with that reinvestment back into local community benefits? Thank you. This question comes from Kristen Reckberger, CEO of Dynamic Planet here in DC.
I could start if you'd like. Well, just coming from regenerative design, I think that you really need to start from what's unique and irreplaceable about the place and double down on that. You're getting the more things are copied, the less value they have. So I think what we need is an overarching regenerative design strategy. I've been talking to Bill Reed at Regenesis Institute about this, and he's eager to assist the process. But looking at stakeholders, shared purpose, and then really creating a strategy that brings us together in a way that increases the capacity to become more unique and irreplaceable.
If I can add to that, that's a fantastic question. If that person is watching, you mentioned a lot of great stuff in a very small, short question. I mean, I think we have to ask ourselves, how badly do we want regenerative travel? Like, we talk about these buzzwords, but how badly do we want it? Because we all know it's possible, but it's not a one-way experience. It has to be reciprocal, and it has to be a reciprocal experience, and it has to be an equally beneficial experience to local communities. And so when we ask ourselves how badly we want, transformational travel or transformative travel, we know the way. And he mentioned leakage. Creating ways in which money stays in those communities is the first way that we can truly create transformational travel. We talk about transformational travel as a one-way experience for the customer. And if you truly want transformational and regenerative, it's not a one-way experience. So we have to, and so, those questions are things that we would ask ourselves. And I'll just say that Panama has done an amazing job traditionally protecting and promoting its natural assets, the natural side. But its true differentiator, which they haven't focused on previously, is the indigenous communities. And that takes a lot of care and a lot more finesse and fuss on long-term investment, as I mentioned before, about creating trust with those communities. But really it is the clear differentiator, because when you look at other countries and what they have to offer, when you look at taking an audit of tourism assets, countries don't have those kind of indigenous communities to be able to promote as a part of the tourism assets of that country. So it's a clear differentiator for Panama, and so all of these discussions are very important, and creating something different, because there's lots of countries that promote the natural side of their businesses, but few have the opportunities to invest in indigenous experiences and this regenerative whatever. That travel. You get it. Thanks.
Maybe just a quick thought on it. The other thing that got exposed in the pandemic is the mess we have called our colleges and universities. And what I think we've discovered, and we're working on a model up in Minnesota, but we've talked about it also down in Panama, is that students, they didn't miss college, they missed the campus. And the ability to create a campus experience. So I think it's hard to do if you're going to show up for 2 weeks or you're going to visit for 2 days, to the question. But if we're going to start with the youth and educate them, and they're then through their social media going to influence their grandparents and everyone else, I think it's a model of a semester abroad. I mean, it's been really amazing for Barcelona, where I've spent 8 years as a destination for college students. And they want that experience of being able to work in the community and give back to the community and that kind of thing. So I don't know, maybe there's a pony in there someplace, but I think creating a campus experience within the indigenous, and Bruce, you're the one who gave me the idea there, might be one thought. I don't know.
Thank you so much. Yes, we do have one more question here, and I'll...
I'm sorry.
She wants to say I'm right.
Yes, thank you. I also think that because the question was towards keeping the revenues from the experience within the community, and you mentioned something which might have just passed through and not be perceived, but little things like suntan lotion, that it's damaging the coral reefs, and it could become a business opportunity for those communities to expect anyone who would go there to use the right kind of suntan lotion, for instance, and be created there in that community. And there's so many other business opportunities that could arise from that when the community owns the future that they have in common, and they realize that it is a good practice to become a good business also. Because, well, Panama is aiming to become the sustainable hub for the Americas, the hub for sustainable investments. And we do believe that you can do good and still do well. So those two things should not be divorced from each other. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities that would come from also public policy, looking at this as a holistic approach. Because if we want people to use, for instance, the right kind of suntan lotion to go into our oceans, then we should make that a public policy and make sure that it is something that is enforced, because it is damaging our oceans, and this is the thing that is going to keep these communities in business for the future. No?
Thank you. I believe Max, yes?
Yeah, I wanted to add to this conversation too. I totally agree with you. I have the example of Palau, also of the pledge of Palau. I don't know if you know, but when you enter to Palau, you need to sign a pledge that actually is asking you to not leave anything that doesn't belong to the place. You will not take anything that doesn't also belongs to you. And you know, the relation with the community and with the environment, I think it is a great thing because it makes you think about the place where you're going, you know, and with what attitude actually too. I think it is critical in general. I also think it's a question of narrative. I love that you mentioned this because it's the narrative of everything. No? A very close country to Panama, you know, have a very strong narrative, but sometimes I personally find that is not very rooted once you are actually there, and I think those kind of things need to be kind of connected. No. If you go to the market in Panama a few years ago, I was working on a campaign on sharks, and you could find all the ceviche was shark, newborn hammerhead shark. No, how do we change that too? How do we you know, this helped to change that too. So we actually do a good for the ocean, and not finally, you know, getting more tourism, getting, you know, more sharks catch and then disappearing. And I've seen it. Particularly in this government, I've seen a huge shift that I haven't seen it in. So I'm very hopeful that those things are going to continue. There's and this connect with the Bio Museum too as a big platform that I think it can be used. As you know, the country is going to host the CITES, which is one of the biggest UN conference is on the trade of species, you know, and so good news can come from there, and I think good news can come from Panama on how to do it better. I love that all these things, and today there's no plastic, pretty much, no. And I think those are thoughtful things that we need to constantly be aware of, because you can't be saying one thing, you know, you need to talk the walk the talk, or whatever. And, you know, I think it is great to see those things, and that will bring these other people who will be committed, you know, with this Instagram that Leo DiCaprio posts. I was so happy because, I mean, I work with Leo too, but I was so happy particularly with Panama because it was so much proud on seeing themselves actually in an Instagram of Leo DiCaprio, no? It went into every single newspaper, every single TV channel. It was huge, but beyond, that millions of people can be reached by Leo, I think it was for the Panamanians to see themselves. We can be as good and as big as any other, and I want to reiterate, I think you are already bigger, and if we continue with that sort of narrative, I think it could be incredible, and that will bring more attention, but it will bring more ambition from the government and from the next governments and everyone to actually do more. And that would be a perfect sort of circle of good. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for such thorough responses. We have one more question here in the chat. I'll go ahead and read that. How does the panel see the interface between science, indigenous cultures, and tourism actually working in practical terms? And this question comes from Andrew Coates in Panama. I guess that's...
So the connection between indigenous tourism?
Yes, so I'll read that again. How does the panel see the interface between science, indigenous cultures, and tourism actually working in practical terms?
Okay, I'll take that first, and if anyone can add, please do. So as you've all seen, the model we are working on is based on the original tourism conservation research model, which basically promotes or stimulates that tourism experiences have a base in science. So wherever we are working with indigenous communities, and we have been actually proudly getting closer to indigenous communities, and for the first time ever in the government, we've presented to all 12 traditional authorities of indigenous communities and signed for the first time ever an agreement with the Gunayala GUNA General Congress. So wherever we're working in indigenous communities, we are promoting that scientific information is highlighted in relation to biodiversity and also the history and their culture. And in that sense, we have a very practical project that we have actually just begun with the Foundational for Panamanian Sustainable Tourism, as well as with Planeterra. Two of the people that represent these entities are here today. And in this project, we're working on a pilot program with 10 communities, not all indigenous, but because we're trying to be as diverse as possible, so we're trying to create diverse tourism experiences throughout the country. And in these communities, we are also focusing to work with this model. So again, this is an initial project with 10 communities to begin with, but then we want to scale it up from there. And the project ends up also connecting with the tourism sector, so the tourism sector can then market the communities or tourism experiences in the communities that actually are ready for the market. This is all going through a process that has this model, which highlights scientific information and cultural information and caters to this particular type of demand that we've been speaking about.
Can I add to that? Just the question about just in practical terms of science and indigenous communities and tourism is the perfect partnership as far as I'm concerned, and it's something that hasn't existed for a long time, which is actually putting science and communities together. Science is great for us in tourism, just from a tourism perspective, because it creates data and all. And as a commercial entity, we're conditioned to make decisions based on data. Especially in a digital world now, most decisions are, data decides so much than it ever has. So, having a partner in science to supply data or give data or to create data that's needed to make decisions is a very powerful thing. Now, the relationship with the communities, however, is best, is with the tourism entities, creating the needs, listening to the needs, and also communicating the needs of what we need as tour operators, and also translating science and data to communities. One thing scientists aren't very good at is communicating in a way that's understandable for everyone sometimes. And tourism can be that, and operators can be that vehicle with indigenous communities to practically explain how data works and how we're making those decisions and rationally make data-based decisions with these communities. And again, what I was saying before about creating that dialogue and that conversation and that relationship and that trust, but science being at the heart of the data and understanding of whatever it is you're working on in that partnership. Thank you.
My name's Roberta Baskin. I'm a recovering journalist, and on the edge of my seat, listening to this dialogue, really appreciating it, and thinking about what you said about influencers, and thinking about the recent tourism that we saw with billionaires blasting off into space. And the fact that they've made a 40% gain in their wealth, the U.S. billionaires, $1.1 trillion gain since mid-March 2020. And thinking about the state of the Earth, which will be here, but humanity won't be here if we don't get our act together really fast, and we have this short window. And I'm wondering what thoughts you might have about how do you influence those influencers, those billionaires who don't have enough years left to spend their wealth, and to do something heroic and important in terms of creating the kind of world that we need to leave for our children and for their children. Any thoughts on how you get them involved? And I did visit Geoversity. I had the privilege and beauty of being there earlier this year. So that was my transformational travel. And I lie awake at night and think about these billionaires and how do you get them to do something heroic and important with this staggering wealth that is just, the wealth gap is just, has increased more during COVID than any other time.
Okay. So yeah, it's a great question. We constantly, in the NGO sector now, we're constantly sort of asking the same question: how do we actually bring these people? I mean, it's the amount of money there. No, I mean, you wonder a company called Amazon, and then how much actually they're putting into the Amazon itself. It is crazy. We've seen lately a much more bigger investment for sure into nature conservation, rewilding to regeneration, and I think it's leading a lot of this big movements. Just last week I was with a funder billionaire who's put in a lot of effort of her time and money and willing to do more, and she wants to really scale up, and I think they're great motivation, they're great opportunities. Question always for me, being a Latin American too, is how do you actually make sure that money also will be received, those resources will be received down, in the bottom of the line, let's say, to those communities and others, because it becomes also, there's a huge filter of where those monies can finally finance, big institution, big, administration fees and many other things. And I think that's one of the key elements on how do we fix that finally we help those in need and who are actually fighting for, their environment every day. And I think we're still far. If we can kind of try to together to find those ways and be more, working more in cooperation. And I'm saying this from the NGO sector too, would be amazing. My personal experience, having been working now with Smithsonian and the face of Hector, it's been amazing. We're preparing a expedition now soon, and some funders and donors, philanthropists are getting more and more interested about Panama and how to invest in marine conservation there. And as I said before, it will only grow if the narrative it's the same, no? And I think there's more. I know some conversations with some of these big billionaires. They're really interested to scale up their funding. But again, how do we make sure that is also not just money? It's how do we get the best use of that money to everyone.
So with that, I would like to thank everybody for your questions. I know that we have a lot more questions and a lot more opportunities for having conversations about these important topics. This has been an incredible morning, and I have the very difficult task that in 5 minutes summarize these amazing, the words of these amazing panelists. So I'm gonna give it a try. So I'm gonna try to go through. As always, our panelists will be available for a few minutes after we finish the event. So if you want to address them or get their contacts or follow up with questions, I'm sure they're actually very happy to do so. So let me actually try to attempt to do a summary of this amazing morning. That, by the way, has been very inspiring. So we started the morning hearing from Minister Ivan Skilson about the tourism conservation and research model for Panama as a way to as a catalyst for economic development and also heritage development. He talked about authentic and transformational experience, and we heard the word transformational quite a lot, and some of you have been having a transformation today, we hope. We heard then from Dr. Michael Smith, and he talked about how do we interact with other cultures. He also talked about the importance of having a preparation readiness for the experience from a human perspective, so you can get immersed in the experience and take advantage of the experience. And those words going hand in hand with some of the other speakers. In a question session, he talked about empathy, the need of personal meaning, And actually that touches to the humans who we are and how we connect to nature in ways that we traditionally don't do it. We also heard from Mr. Max Bello and the amazing message from Sylvia Earle about the value of protecting marine areas and about how protecting nature, that we need to protect nature as is our lives depend on it, because it does. Max talked about tourism, about one example of, one best example for No Borders, actually mentioning how animals and plants and species about diversity don't know borders. And the truth of the matter is they don't. A whale goes from all the way from Canada to Chile, and they never find out whether there is actually a border or a country, if they go to Panama, if they go to Costa Rica. So it's actually a great actual example of that. Max also talked about, addresses climate change and the fact that oceans have not been included in some of the negotiations, and the oceans are really the cradle for life in many, many ways, and it's something that we need to actually address. He talked about blue carbon, the importance of actually considering that. And then we actually heard from Tamsin. She talked about innovation inspired by nature. How amazing concept. She's a scientist who works in biomimicry, and she talked about how nature can teach us amazing lessons in which we humans can learn about how better interact with with the environment. And she also said that if we were paying more attention about what things happen and how evolution teaches us lessons, we will be better off as a species. Dr. Burns Harnich talked about raising awareness of tourism around the world, but it requires a function of marketing. He talked about not having experts. I mean, we actually have people who know. He actually talked about not being resilience, but that's a very interesting concept. Resilience as a way of, and the way he said it is that nature teaches us that we can actually be anti-fragile, that the concept of resilience can be taken to a different level or from a different perspective, not the usual way. And he talked about pushing innovation. I think everybody got here his last word today. Influence to the use of influencers. And everybody heard him said about the importance of marketing and how we do marketing in a more sustainable way. And last but not least, we actually heard from Bruce Punte. He actually taught about not fighting back to the normal, because normal wasn't probably what we wanted to be. Probably the pandemic provides an amazing opportunity to think differently. One of his words that impresses me is the fact that people are actually looking for the importance of actually, the danger, of losing what is the main objective of going to a destination. When the amenity becomes more important, then that's a danger. So we need to engage people to go to a destination because they're inspired of the destination, not because they want to go and experience the amenity. The amenity is not what matters. We want people to think differently, he said. Educate consumer to be responsible and better define what sustainability. And he actually, at the end, mentioned the importance of culture, dialogue, and storytelling as the three more important things to work with the communities. With that, I try to summarize briefly some of the key aspects of the morning, and want to thank Bern, Michael, Tamsin, Bruce, and Max for this amazing opportunity to share with us their knowledge, their thoughts, and actually their experience. And Mr. Skilson also thank the Authority of Panama and the Government of Panama for providing this venue to share this important actually topic for Panama and for the world, and for Panama to be an example, a leading country in the world of tourism, conservation, and research. With that, I want to thank you all for your participation. I'm going to turn it to Mr. Skilson for final words.
Thank you, Dr. Sanhur. For you all to know, there will be a report of this roundtable that we will share with everybody. So in case you missed a particular piece that you'd like to read over again, we will have that opportunity. And for me, to finalize, I would just like to thank all of you, especially Dr. Sanhur, the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, this amazing venue. Can't believe we're actually holding our roundtable in this great building and full of history and science, so close to what we were talking about. Also thanking our panelists. Thank you all for your great contributions. And the audience, you've also added great contributions as well. So for all of you, thanking you for your considerable help and support making this possible. And finally, also for your contributions to reimagining the future of tourism the way we believe it should be shaped. So thank you all, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. We have a few more people to thank. Dr. Joshua Tewksbury, Director of the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, and of course, along with Dr. Oris Sanhur, and also Dr. Kirk Johnson and his entire team here at the Natural History Museum for making all of this possible. We are so delighted you could join us today to hear about the relaunch of the TCR Economic Plan, a system designed to work with nature. Thank you.